Happy Friday, and today is Prose Day, but even more than Prose Day, we're going to be finding out more about John Lewis. There's a wonderful book downstairs that actually was first published in 1998, but it has, with his passing, great relevance to today. The book is called Walking with the Wind, a memoir of the movement, John Lewis with Michael Dorso. And that's what the cover of the paperback looks like. It has been an incredibly rich experience to read this book, might I add. I'm going to share you with two bits from it. First is the prologue, and this is John Lewis speaking. I want to begin this book with a little story. Oh, it has nothing to do with the national stage or historic figures or monumental events. It's a simple story, a true story, about a group of young children, a wood frame house, and a windstorm. The children were my cousins, Roy Lee and Ginny Boy, Naomi, Leslie, and Willie Muriel. About a dozen of them all told, all along with my older sister Ora and my brothers, Edward and Adolph. Oh, and me, John Robert. I was 4 years old at the time, too young to understand there was a war going on over in Europe and out in the Pacific as well. The grown-ups called it a world war, but I had no idea what that meant. The only world I knew was the one I stepped out into each morning, a place of thick pine forests and white cotton fields and red clay roads winding around my family's house in our little corner of Pike County, Alabama. We had just moved that spring onto some land my father had bought, the first land anyone in his family had ever owned. 110 acres of cotton, corn, and peanut fields, along with an old but sturdy 3-bedroom house, a large house for that part of the country, the biggest place for miles around. It had a well in the front yard, and pecan trees out back, and muscadine grapevines growing wild in the woods all around us. Our woods. My father bought the property from a local white businessman who lived in the nearby town of Troy. The total payment was $300, cash. That was every penny my father had to his name, money he had earned the way almost everyone we knew made what money they could use in those days. By tenant farming. My father was a sharecropper, planting, raising, and picking the same crops that had been grown in that soil for hundreds of years, by tribes like the Choctaws and the Chickasaws and the Creeks, Native Americans who were working this land long before the place was called Alabama, long before black or white men were anywhere to be seen in these parts. Almost every neighbor we had in those woods was a sharecropper, and most of them were our relatives. Nearly every adult I knew was an aunt or an uncle, every child my first or second cousin. Now that included my Uncle Rabbit and Aunt Seneva and their children, who lived about a mile and a half up the road from us. On this particular afternoon, it was a Sunday, I'm almost certain, about 15 of us children were outside my Aunt Seneva's house playing in her dirt yard. The sky began clouding over. The wind started picking up. Lightning flashed far out in the distance. And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about playing anymore. I was terrified. I had already seen what lightning could do. I'd seen fields catch on fire after a hit to a haystack. I'd watched trees actually explode when a bolt of lightning struck them, the sap inside rising to an instant boil, the trunk swelling until it burst its bark. The sight of those strips of pine bark snaking through the air like ribbons was both fascinating and horrifying. Lightning terrified me. Oh, and so did thunder. My mother used to gather us around her whenever we heard thunder, and she'd tell us to hush, be still now, because God was doing his work. That was what thunder was, my mother said. It was the sound of God doing his work. But my mother wasn't with us on this particular afternoon. Aunt Seneva was the only adult around, and as the sky blackened and the wind grew stronger, she herded us all inside. Her house was not the biggest place around, and it seemed even smaller with so many children squeezed inside, small and surprisingly quiet. All the shouting and laughter that had been going on earlier outside had stopped. The wind was howling now. The house was starting to shake. Oh, we were scared. Even Aunt Seneva was scared. And then it got worse. Now the house was beginning to sway. The wood planks flooring beneath us began to bend, and then a corner of the room started lifting up. Oh, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. None of us could. The storm was actually pulling the house toward the sky with us in it. That was when Aunt Seneva told us to clasp hands. Line up, hold hands, she said. And when we did as we were told, then she had us walk as a group toward the corner of the room that was rising. From the kitchen to the front of the house, we walked, the wind screaming outside, sheets of rain beating on the tin roof. Then we walked back in the other direction as another section of the house began to lift. And so it went, back and forth, 15 children walking with the wind, holding that trembling house down with the weight of our small bodies. More than half a century has passed since that day, and it has struck me more than once over those many years that our society is not unlike the children in that house, rocked again and again by the winds of one storm or another, the walls around us seeming at times as if they might fly apart. It seemed that way in the 1960s, at the height of the civil rights movement, when America felt as if it might burst at the seams. So much tension, so many storms. But the people of conscience never left the house. They never ran away. They stayed. They came together and they did the best they could, clasping hands and moving toward the corner of the house that was the weakest. And then another corner would lift, and we would go there. And eventually, inevitably, the storm would settle, and the house would still stand. But we knew another storm would come, and we would have to do it all over again. And we did. And we still do, all of us, you and I. Children holding hands, walking with the wind. That is America to me. Oh, not just the movement for civil rights, but the endless struggle to respond with decency, dignity, and a sense of brotherhood to all the challenges that face us as a nation, as a whole. That is the story, in essence, of my life, of the path of which I've been committed since I turned from boy to a man, and to which I remain committed today. It is a path that extends beyond the issue of race alone and beyond class as well, and gender, and age, and every other distinction that tends to separate us as human beings rather than to bring us together. That path involves nothing less than the pursuit of the most precious and pure concept I have ever known. An ideal I discovered as a young man and that has guided me like a beacon ever since. A concept called the beloved community. Let me tell you how I came to understand that concept, how it ushered me into the heart of the most meaningful and monumental movement of this American century, and how it might steer us all where we deserve to go in the next. Let me tell you about my life. Thus begins this biography. Now, within the child lies the man. There's a section of photographs, and I won't try to communicate them to you via the digital magnificence we have before us, but I do want you to see that little young man that I'm pointing to. We all know what John Lewis looks like or looked like today, but that's what he looked like as a young child. What a sweet face. I wonder if he knew what lay before him in his story. Now, I'm going to read another section toward the end of the biography. We're at a point in our history where we're not sure we can believe in anyone Oh, I believe great leaders can still emerge. I believe that will always be possible. But this is probably as difficult as a time as there has ever been for it to happen on the national level in America. There are so many factors conspiring against it. First, I believe there is a general fear, a mistrust of putting our faith in any individual in an era in which everyone has disappointed us. Everyone has let us down. No one has turned out to be who we thought he or she was. Past 30 years have seen so much betrayal, so much deceit, so much disappointment. Oh, not just among our elected officials, but among our religious leaders, our sports and celebrity icons, among all those figures who have traditionally been a focus of our hopes and beliefs and respect. There has even been an erosion of respect within our families, as too many families have sadly lost the qualities of cohesion and commitment that form the basis of belief. It is not surprising to see the phenomenal outpouring of universal grief over the recent passing of Princess Diana and, to some degree, of Mother Teresa. People are desperate for a place to put their beliefs and respect. They find so few figures anymore who seem to deserve it. A huge factor in this loss of faith in our leaders is the media. Never has there been such a collective microscope put on people of prominence in our society as there is today. We have a voracious mass market of hundreds and hundreds of newspapers, magazines, network, cable television programs, radio, talk radio, the emerging technology of the internet, all of it demanding a ceaseless torrent of material to feed its bottomless pit of programming and pages. And so we learn everything about the people who would be our leaders, everything about their personal character, their personal tastes, their parents, their personalities, and their past. We dissect them. They step into the spotlight and we eat them up. Just chew them up and spit them out, almost as sport, as an end in itself. Anyone who emerges on the national landscape becomes a target of this feeding frenzy. Oh, not because there is necessarily cause, but simply because he or she stands out. Oh, and I'm not condemning the right nor the need of the press to search for and share the information and analyses that provide the public with the knowledge necessary to make informed decisions. There is no denying the natural desire and delight of people to peek into the lives of larger-than-life figures, the stars and celebrities of the sports and entertainment industries, for example. But we need to ask ourselves where lines might be drawn. On the celebrity side of things, the death of Princess Diana certainly prompted a serious international dialogue on this issue. In terms of our elected officials, I think we need to ask some of the same questions. How far should we go with our need to know before we completely veer off into the personal and the private and leave behind any chance of having a legitimate debate or discussion or discourse about the issues at hand? Those lines are difficult to draw, and they are made even more difficult by the lack of listening going on in America right now. This is another result of the polarization and segmentation of our society, combined with the explosion of the media. Everyone's got an agenda. Everyone's got a platform. Turn on the television and you'll see a round table of experts shouting each other down in a discussion of the day's hot topic. Turn on the radio and you'll hear callers arguing endlessly about the same subjects the experts on TV are shouting about. But none, or very few, of these discussions lead anywhere because no one is actually listening. No one is considering and possibly absorbing anyone else's ideas but their own. It's as if people's object is to stand behind the walls of their own opinion and hurl bombs at one another to see who makes the loudest bang. There's nothing constructive about that. And that kind of behavior has crept into the political arena as well, with blanket statements, finger-pointing, and attacks replacing reasoned discussion and debate. Oh, I think it's time, both individually and collectively, for us to step back and consider whether we want to keep going in this direction. When opinions and information become ends in themselves rather than means to an end, we need to stop and ask ourselves, what is the point? Where is this taking us? It's no wonder that many people are simply turning away from it all, from the newspaper, from television, from radio, from politics, from the whole loud, noisy mess. They're disgusted. They're weary. They want to believe in something. That need never goes away. But they don't believe they'll find what they're looking for in any public arena. Is it possible for government to ever fill that need again? Is it possible for a leader to emerge of the kind we have had in the past? Is it possible for some force or some figure to come forward who can restore our faith in the system of government that has gotten us to this point in our history? Can we ever have another king, another Kennedy? I don't know. I really don't know. But I can say this. If a leader is to emerge, he or she will have to come from a place beyond race. Oh, I honestly don't believe we can have a national leader today who appeals to just one or two of a few segments of this vast, diverse nation we call America. I believe the power and the endurance of Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision and leadership was the fact that it extended to all people. Oh, regardless of class or race. Most of the American people, black and white alike, understood and believed that message of brotherhood and justice. A message that cut across all lines of wealth, of color, or gender, or age. Oh, they understood it. And they felt it when he spoke of the beloved community. Consider those two words, beloved. Not hateful, not violent, not uncaring, not unkind, and community. Not separated, not polarized, not adversarial. People are dying to embrace these feelings. If only they could trust. If only they could dare to believe, both in one another and their leaders. That belief must be earned. It cannot be bought. It cannot be elected. It cannot be legislated. A person does not become a leader simply by assuming a position, filling a chair, or earning a title. A real leader doesn't see himself as standing out in front of the people. He sees himself as standing beside them, among them. He doesn't tell people to dig a ditch. He gets down in the ditch with them and helps them dig it himself. That's why people believe so strongly and follow so faithfully a figure like Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Cesar Chavez, or Nelson Mandela, because they spent their entire lives getting down in the ditches and digging. Our future is in the hands of the young, as it has always been. One generation hands off to the next, and each new generation has its own vision, its own ideals, its own beliefs. That is what it means to be young. You believe. Your focus is on the future, not the past. But at this juncture in American history, perhaps more than any other, it is critical that our young people be aware of and understand the past. I try my best to keep in contact with the young, both by going out into the communities and the schools, and by meeting students in Washington when they come to visit. And I can say with certainty that there is a feeling of despondency, cynicism, of utter disbelief among a large majority of them that the system can respond to their needs and beliefs at all. Many young black people, because they have never experienced the old discrimination, the old order, have a hard time believing that there has been any progress at all. As for the young white people, many of them either aren't aware of or refuse to believe what it was really like to be black in America just 40 years ago. They perceive black demands for justice today as special pleading for unfair advantage. Black and white alike. A large number of our younger generation are cut up like the larger society, getting their piece of the pie. A large number of them no longer speak in moral terms. They're not asking what they can do to help the total society, including that large segment of the society that is still left behind. Instead, they are simply asking what they can do to help themselves. I was asked several years ago to write an essay on what prayer means to me, on how I pray. Each of us has our own answer to that question. Here is mine. On the one hand, prayer to me is an attempt to communicate with a power, with a force, with a being much greater than I am. On the other hand, it is a period of simply having an executive session with yourself. It's a period of being alone, a period of meditation, a period of quiet, just being you. Oh, it can happen in a public setting. It can happen in a meeting. It can happen while you're flying in a plane or riding in a car or waiting to make a speech or almost any time. You hear people from time to time say, "Oh, I need to steal away and pray." In my own case, I can steal away almost any time. I can be on the elevator. I can be involved in a march, a sit-in, some type of non-violent protest, and still be engaged in prayer. And sometimes I pray when I have something very difficult to deal with. You're constantly in prayer to some spirit or some force to help you make the right decision, to give you the courage to follow through or to stand your ground. I don't, as a rule, engage in formal prayer. When I first came to Congress, I attended the Thursday morning prayer breakfast on a regular basis. The conflict of meetings makes it impossible for me to go now, but that doesn't keep me from praying. When I go home in the evening, I pray just like when I was growing up. Oh, I don't necessarily get down on my knees and say a prayer before going to bed, but sometimes I'm in bed and I say a prayer. So I'm always asking somebody, some force, some power, whether it's God Almighty or what I sometimes refer to as the spirit of history, to take care of me, to help me make the right decision, to see me through something. Sometimes when I have a major statement to make on the floor, I call on that force, that source, to help me, to guide me. When I look back on my own life and what I've come through, I can say that it was the prayers of the true believers, the prayers of an involved community of similar minds that made it possible for me to be here. sometimes. When I look back at the film footage of that civil rights fight and see what happened to me at Selma or on the Freedom rides, I have to believe that it was the prayer of the faithful that made it possible for some of us to still be here. From time to time, I feel the presence of that power, that force that I call the spirit of history. Sometimes you're guided by it, led by it. Other times, you're in tune with that force and you can communicate with it. You have to be in tune. You have to allow yourself to be used by this supreme being. That's what made me feel we were, when we were at the height of the civil rights movement, whether it was the march from Selma to Montgomery or going on the Freedom rides, that we were involved in something like the Holy Crusade. It was an extension of my religious convictions, of my faith. We would sing a song or say a prayer, and it was an affirmation that it was the right thing to do. At that time, we were communicating with a supreme being, with this force. Prayer is one of the most powerful, well, I don't want to call it a weapon, but it is a tool, an instrument, a way of reaching out that humankind has. We can and do use it to deal with problems and the things and issues that we don't understand, that we don't quite comprehend. It's very hard to separate the essence of prayer and faith. We pray because we believe that praying can make what we believe, our dreams, our visions, come true. Amen. There is an old African proverb. When you pray, move your feet. As a nation, if we care for the beloved community, we must move our feet, our hands, our hearts, our resources to build and not to tear down, to reconcile, not to divide, to love and not to hate, to heal and not to kill. In the final analysis, we are one people, one family, one house, the American house, the American family. Reintroduce yourself to this man. He has things that we can still learn. Thank you for coming. And please have a very safe, happy, joyous weekend. And I'll see you on Wednesday for poetry.